All right. Do you remember Miracle on 34th Street? That 1947 Christmas classic where the magical Macy's Santa dared to send a customer to a different store so that they could get what they really wanted. I think it was skates, but it's not really important in this moment what the thing was. The whole point was Santa wasn't there to sell stuff. Santa was there to help people reconnect to the spirit of Christmas, the spirit of generosity and hope and believing in impossible things, and ultimately in love. At first, the store manager was furious, but it turned out Santa's act of goodwill actually boosted revenue because the people got their needs met. Now, that's really at the heart of everything for me. Are the people getting their needs met? Only you can truly know. It's not for me to choose or decide. I'm just here to advocate for your well-being, your individual and your collective well-being, for capital's well-being. So let's begin. If I had 1 minute to tell you everything I wanted to make sure you knew, this is what I would say. You are beautiful. You are whole. You are worthy. You are suffering, but that is not unmovable. You are not perfect, and that's good, because perfect is the enemy of good. You always have choices. It is preferable to make them in slow and gentle times, but take whatever time it takes. Everything cycles. You have a tendency to be difficult. Which action will you be most proud of in retrospect? What priority truly deserves to be first? You've built something beautiful here. Focus on your purpose and notice when your purpose changes. You are beautiful and whole and worthy. Peace and love are your birthright and also your life's work. That's it. That's everything. Each of you will understand these words in your own way. That's how life and community works. I have printed them out for myself to read each morning, to hold these promises front and center, and to see what comes of it. They may not be a perfect fit for you, but we already talked about perfect. Fortunately, we have more than 1 minute, so we'll add a bit of detail. You are beautiful and whole and worthy. It's there twice on purpose, because it's the essential lesson that we all need to work through. And it's the very reason for religious community, to help one another remember that everyone is beautiful and whole and worthy. The task then always is to work at remembering what is good and true. We help to alleviate the suffering by identifying and remembering what is good and true. Again, each of you will have your own understanding, your own priorities, your own commitments. Together, you help one another to refine your commitments. The Reverend Alice Blair Wesley tells us that we come together to do the work of refining, of defining, and then remembering our real and right loves and putting them to the test of practical application. Because it's only in the enacting of our most essential commitments that we live into the purpose and promise of our lives and of our communities. You are suffering, but that is not unmovable. There is a thing that is happening in faith communities across the continent right now where people are anxious. And it's not just our tradition, it's all of them, no matter what they tell you. Even those ones that are telling a shiny story. People are anxious because numbers are down, because families with children are making different choices, because volunteers and staff are stretched thin beyond what is safe or healthy for them, and financial reserves are dwindling. I don't know of a single congregation right now, and I talk to half the congregations in the country, that isn't running a deficit budget. And the people who remain, the workers and the attenders and the visitors, they love their congregations. And they want those very same loving communities to be available for generations who follow. And the people's spidey senses are tingling, telling them that this exactly sameness just might not be realistic. And this is true in our lives and in our workplaces as well. The sustainability of everything is in question. The kindest thing I can tell you today is that caregivers often work themselves into a crisis, caring for loved ones with very high needs. Because at some point, caregivers start to believe that they are the only, and I mean only, person who can take care of their beloved and do it properly. And they want their beloveds to remain faithful and reliable and consistent and loving and most especially right. They want their wards to be cared for in the way that they would do it. And these are all very admirable qualities and ideals, and there is nothing wrong that is with care that is faithful and reliable and consistent and loving and right, until the toll it takes on the caregiver becomes injurious. Because once the well-being of the caregivers is at risk, then everyone is in trouble. We can think that there is no one who can do the same job we do, and that is absolutely true. There is only one you. There is only one capital. You are each unique. But if you stop, if you get ill or die, or even just step away, there will be someone or some system, something else that fills the gap. It won't be the way you'd do it, but there will be something. And sacrificing your own well-being to harm yourself or another, sacrificing to the point where you are now injured or gone or otherwise unable to show up, well, that's not really helping anyone, most especially you. Many of you have been through this difficult situation or seen others go through it, and you've needed help. As we age, our own health falters, and then it becomes even more personal. What kind of care do we want? And what kind of care do we need? I watched my parents stay home alone for far too long. My father physically declining and my mother losing her cognitive function. They needed one another to get through the tasks of daily living, but neither of them was thriving until something shifted. I am not saying you should put capital into palliative care, if that's what you're taking from my words. Right? I see you, Kathy. Wrong paragraph. There is a time when every community, every business or family or organization will either shift or end, every single one of them. But I am not prescribing that. Just stick with me here. You always have choices. It is preferable to make them in slow and gentle times, but take whatever time it takes. Everything cycles. Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits guys, teaches that our highest priority should be to determine what is important and focus our work there. And the biggest threat to what is important is what is an emergency or urgent. We get carted off track by the things that are on fire. And that's important. We need to put out fires. But if that's our constant state, fires and emergencies, then we never actually get to what's important. Making a decision about whether to sign the rental agreement on your past location was an emergency. You handled it with such grace. And it took a lot of energy, especially behind the scenes, and it took a toll. COVID was an emergency. It had to take priority. You got online and you stayed together. You learned that you are not your location. You are the ways that you gather and support one another. You are the covenants you hold with one another. You are a combination of intentions and impacts played out by the way you conduct your actions, your relationships, your abilities to share and support one another. Settling on the next location is not an emergency. That might be hard to hear. But settling on the next location is not an emergency. It can feel like one. It's a big decision that you, and especially your leaders, probably want off your shoulders as soon as possible. It's also happening in a time where you're experiencing a feeling of loss, but it is not an emergency. You are still together. You're here this morning. You're continuing pub nights and dancing and Thursday discussion group. You still sing together. You still have a contact list and you know how to find one another. And you have the Zoom, for which I am immensely grateful this morning because it's the Zoom services where I can see all of your faces for the whole thing. So let me say the scary thing again. Settling on your next location is not an emergency. We are learning across the country and around the world that it is hard to shift an existing organization to be more nimble and more relevant and more sustainable into the future. It's hard because our ways and means are established, and sometimes they can be as unmovable as concrete. And we're learning that it's easier to make changes when you are really, truly in a liminal space, when you are displaced from the familiar, when you are in a state of uncertainty or flux. If you can keep the panic of feeling urgency down, it's a magical moment. I know you're tired. You've collectively been through a lot, and you are individually carrying a lot. Having me come here didn't make your life simpler. It shone a light on some painful parts, opened some old injuries, and we know that it is more work to resolve them than it is to contain them. Harder because it interrupts patterns, interrupts our traditional coping mechanisms, and resolution is a long game. It's an internal and a community practice. And nobody really wants to wound somebody else. So we don't tend to come to that work especially enthusiastically. Right now, you have the gift of spaciousness to reimagine some essential pieces of your community life together. You have time and space to determine what is actually sustainable before you lock it in again. You have time to notice what is ready for transformation. You have time to reflect on where the burdens are too heavy and which benefits are most worthy. The most precarious thing you could do right now is try to carry on exactly as you were. You always have choices, and when you have breathing space, it's easier to make them. Take the time to look at your sustainability and your priorities, and it can prevent a future where the suffering repeats itself. You have choices, you have neighbors, you have one another, and you'll have me in a new way as your congregational life staff person with the CUC. We can talk about sustainability and best practices. This isn't one of those the minister disappears for 2 years situations. Now, here are the challenging bits. We all know that we don't always get what we want. We don't always get a do-over or a cure or the situation we dreamed of. We have aches and disappointments that we carry. We want our lost loved ones back. We want to be healthy again or out of pain. We want choices or resources or skills that we just don't have or don't have access to. And we want another chance at something, maybe just one more try. We want to be relieved of our suffering, and we want to feel a sense of peace. We don't want to be anxious or afraid or angry anymore. So our journey is about learning what's going on, seeking the story. And you get the story best from the balcony view, one step removed. And then clarifying what is needed, and more importantly, what is actually doable. It doesn't matter what's needed if you can't carry it out. You have to change something. Helping one another to know that they have choices, and helping one another to find peace, however that looks. Your work is making the choices, finding out how to get closer and closer to your centered self, to compassion, and to peace. Now, I know I said we are not perfect and we have a tendency to be difficult, and some of you laughed. That made me happy. I'll tell you in the forum what the second line actually said, and Lori made me take it out. But isn't that true of all of us one way or another, that we're not perfect and we have a tendency to be difficult about some things? We're messy. We sometimes forget to carry our stories as lessons, and we carry them as burdens instead, beating ourselves up as we go. We get wrapped up in what we believe is the right thing to do or what we want the most, and we forget to check in with the others around us. We try to keep the system running by adding more and more fuel, by churching harder and working harder and parenting harder, and we forget that we are not alone, that we are not the only person who can do something. And we're going to pause for just a second in case you think I'm talking about any specific person when I say you are not the only person who can do something, because truly I am talking to every one of you. The only reason that any of us carry a heavy load individually is because the systems we are a part of find it beneficial in some way. We don't owe the systems our wellness. Systems can be changed. Every single one of you has the strength and beauty and power to shift a moment in a kind, gentle, and loving way in your personal lives and within Capital. Holding a supportive, loving space is essential work, and it takes all the partners to do it together. You need to work together to help one another stay on track, to help one another come to collective decisions, to help one another remember that each of us is beautiful and whole and worthy, because that is the most important function of this place. Health comes from health. Well-being comes from the source. Help one another to find your essential sources and to remember to connect with them. This is more important than bylaws or location or even coffee. I know. You don't have to get it right every time to help one another stay on track. You can't get it right every time, but you do need to help and to hear one another in these transformational moments. And you cannot leave it in the hands of your leadership alone. The sentences I say most often these days to myself and to others in my life and in my work are these. Which action will you be most proud of when you look back on this moment? What is in integrity? What would you be proud to tell your grandchildren or your neighbor that you did? What is important and deserves your attention right now, not what's an emergency. You'll always deal with emergencies somehow. What is truly important and worthy of your investment. What boundary do you need to set to be safe and well in this moment? And what help do you need to hold it? What choices are sustainable? What is most healthy for the long haul? What will help you get to or help you to restore peace? What are your sources, your practices, your tools? You have built something beautiful here. Focus on your purpose and notice when that purpose changes. It was never about sameness. Think about what it is to be a UU. It's about learning and growth and change and freedom and reason and tolerance and justice and most especially love. Simplify. Clarify. Honor one another. Hold one another accountable to your covenants to help each other find your real and right loves and live into them with the grace I know you know how to do. I've seen you do it. It isn't about the order of service or a new building or how you gather even. It is always truly about helping one another and our global neighbors to remember that you are beautiful and whole and worthy. Peace and love are your birthright, and also they're your life's work. Help one another to find the center, and at the center of everything is breath. Blessed be.